Audience, good evening. It is a pleasure to be here with you tonight. I have truly missed you all. After nearly 20 days without any content, in case you didn't know, my equipment broke, and I couldn't bring you a new episode for a while, Meg. But today I'm back, and not with just anything. Today I return with some very, very intense stories. So get ready, because what you're about to hear is no ordinary episode. Are you ready to discover the most paranormal side of small towns? Turn off your lights, get comfortable, and let's start with the first story. A tale that comes to us from Sinaloa. Let's begin. Today I want to share a story with the whole audience. It happened to me in a town in Sinaloa where dirt roads are still a part of daily life. I'm talking about 25 years ago. I was 19. I worked with my dad, and sometimes I had to travel between nearby ranches. And among so many roads, there was a dirt path that many people used as a shortcut. It was faster than going around by the highway. That path connected to other ranches and was completely normal during the day. Nay, people would pass by on motorcycles, on foot, or in pickup trucks. Nothing strange. But in town there was something everyone talked about. It wasn't official, nor was there any proof, just rumors. They said that path wasn't always the same, that at night it would change. If you crossed it too late, you'd take longer than usual, or worse, end up somewhere else. I never believed that. To me, they were just scary stories. But it wasn't until I experienced it myself. One night, I was returning from visiting a friend at the ranch. It got late, around 12 or 1 in the morning, so I decided to take that path to get home faster. Everything was normal. The night was calm, with no wind. I had taken it several times before, and nothing had ever happened. That night, everything was silent. I could only hear my footsteps and the occasional insect or mosquito. I entered the path without giving it much thought. At first, it was just like always. The same trees, the same rocks, the same trail, the same trail. But after a few minutes, I started to notice something strange. I felt like I had been walking for a long time, longer than normal. But the path wouldn't end. I kept moving forward, trying not to overthink it, until I saw it. A dry, twisted tree, very distinctive. I recognized it because it was always about halfway through the path. I walked past it and kept on going. A few minutes later, I saw it again. The same tree. There I stopped once more. I thought I was mistaken that there was another one like it. But no. It was the same one. It was marked, painted white. Besides, it had the same shape. I felt a strange feeling in my stomach, but I kept walking faster. Not even 5 minutes passed of walking when I saw it again. For the third time I had seen it. That was when something didn't add up. The air in the atmosphere felt different or heavy, as if the place was no longer the same. That was when I heard something. Footsteps. Footsteps behind me. They weren't loud, they were clear, as if someone else were walking on the same path. I stopped and the footsteps did too. I turned with the flashlight, but there was no one, not a single person. The path was completely empty. I kept walking and the footsteps returned. But this time, they didn't stop when I stopped. They kept advancing, as if someone were walking toward me. Even though I stood still, that started to make me nervous. I quickened my pace and the footsteps did too. They weren't running, but they weren't falling behind either. Always at the same distance, without fully closing in, without leaving, just following me. At that moment, I stopped looking back. I just walked faster and faster until the path ended. Or so I thought. Because when I left that path, I wasn't where I was supposed to be. I didn't recognize anything. There were no lights, there were no houses. There was no noise. It was the same type of terrain, but it wasn't my town. I stood there, confused, trying to understand. And then I saw something. In the distance, a small light turned on. I walked a bit more and noticed it was a house, an old house like those from before, like adobe, without electricity. Only a dim light like a candle came through the window. I didn't know what to do, but I couldn't stay there either, so I got a bit closer. Every step felt strange, as if the air were colder, heavier. When I reached the window, I peeked in. And what I still cannot explain, there were people inside. But they didn't look like people from these times. The clothing was different, like from before, a very, very long time ago. Everyone was sitting at a table all around in silence. No one was talking, no one was moving. I was there watching for a bit, when suddenly everyone at the same time turned their heads and looked at me. At that moment I felt a horrible cold, a fear that keeps you from moving. Their faces weren't clear, but I knew they were watching me. I didn't last long. I turned around and ran. I ran without knowing where, without thinking. I went down that little path that had appeared. After a while I managed to leave the path. And there I was, in my town, at the entrance. As if nothing had happened, as if I hadn't gone back. I looked back and the path was just there, normal, as always. Nothing had changed at all. This is the most terrifying and intense experience that has ever happened to me in my life. I still don't understand where I went, or where that path leads. In town, an old man used to say that many, many years ago, before that path existed, there was another ranch there. A very old one. The owners of that ranch disappeared. No one ever knew what became of them. Do you believe in Nahuales? My family and I do, and I'm going to tell you why. The person who lived through all this was my grandfather. Back around 1994 in a small town in Puebla. My grandfather was always known for being a hard-working man. Since he was little, he always got up before the sun came out. Back then, he dedicated himself to caring for his animals as if they were part of the family. For him, life was just about working. He hadn't believed in any strange things. But there was a time when something started happening on his land. It all started little by little. His animals began to go missing. First, it was the chickens. They appeared dead, lying in the pen. However, there was something else. There were no clear signs of an attack. There were no scattered feathers or blood. They were just there, as if something had taken their lives without making a sound. My grandfather thought it was some animal, a coyote, or something like that. But days later, 2 sheep disappeared just like that, without a trace. There were no tracks, no signs of a struggle, nothing. Shortly after, several cows in the pen woke up dead, but it was the same. No signs of violence, no signs of anything. He thought it might be some disease, so he called the best veterinarians, but they couldn't give him any explanation. Little by little, he started to run out of livestock. And it was always the same thing. Either there were no clear signs of death, or they wouldn't show up at all. That was no longer normal. Because in the countryside, when an animal kills, it leaves evidence, but here, there was nothing. Days passed and the problem continued. More animals appeared dead, and that's when he realized something. All the bodies found there didn't have any blood, not a single drop. It was as if something had drained it without breaking or opening them. Then, that started to worry my grandfather, because it wasn't a small loss anymore, it was constant. So he decided to do something. He organized with other men from the town, and they began to watch at night, and they took turns staying near the corral in silence, waiting to see what was happening. The first few nights, nothing happened. Just the sound of the field, the wind, some animal. But one night, everything changed. My grandfather was alone, sitting with his shotgun loaded, just waiting. It was early morning. Everything was silent, a strange, heavy silence. But something broke that silence. He heard something? It was clearly audible that it wasn't a common animal. It didn't sound like normal footsteps, it was something heavier. My grandfather stood up slowly, aimed at the corral, and that's when he saw it. It wasn't a coyote, it wasn't a dog, it wasn't anything he had ever seen before. He described it like a bull, but smaller and deformed, with a strange malformed body, he said. It had horns, but its face wasn't an animal's. It was like a person's, an elongated human face. That thing was prowling around the corral. He saw it also had tufts of long white hair hanging down. That thing was among the animals, but that creature didn't move like an animal. Upon seeing this thing, my grandfather didn't think twice. He aimed at it and fired. The sound echoed throughout the field. The shot hit it directly in the chest. He saw that clearly, because that animal, that nashul, doubled over. It let out a sound that wasn't an animal's. It was a human scream. It ran away, plunged into the darkness, and disappeared. My grandfather stood there, without moving, his heart racing, not knowing exactly what he had seen, but knowing that it wasn't something normal. That night, nothing appeared again. After that, the attacks on the animals stopped. They didn't disappear anymore. They didn't show up dead. Everything started to go back to normal. A few days later, my grandfather found something out. In the town, there was a man. Someone everyone knew, but hardly spoke to anyone. He was always alone, serious, withdrawn. That man had died, but he hadn't died from an illness. He died from a shotgun blast to the chest. They say they found him like that, alone, almost at his house without witnesses, with no one knowing what had happened. But what unsettled my grandfather most was this. That lens, that animal looked just like him. And that wound was exactly where he had shot that animal. This was my family story, my grandfather's story. Thank you very much for listening to me. I am going to tell you a horror story. This happened to me in 2011 in Tuxpan, Veracruz. At that time, I was 24 years old and worked driving. I wasn't a trucker per se, but I did make constant trips between nearby towns, deliveries, errands, whatever came up. It was one of those jobs where you get used to driving at night, to being alone. At first, it's not a burden, but over time, there are nights that feel different. That night was one of those. It had been raining since the afternoon. Those heavy, constant Veracruz rains. And even though you might think it's cold, it was actually very hot. The streets were wet and the road almost empty. It was late, around 1 or 2 in the morning. I just wanted to get home. It had been a very long shift. I was driving calmly, with the windshield wipers moving back and forth, setting the rhythm. Visibility wasn't good. The rain was falling hard. But even so, the road was familiar. I had traveled it many times. Everything was normal until I saw her. She was on the side of the roads, standing in the rain. A woman. She had no umbrella. She wasn't moving. She was just there. At first, I thought it was someone waiting for transport. It wasn't that strange. But then I remembered it was 1 in the morning. That didn't feel right anymore. She wasn't trying to flag me down. She didn't approach. She did nothing. She was just standing there, completely soaked. I drove past her, and for a second I saw her out of the corner of my eye. She had her hair stuck to her face, dark clothes, and a very rigid posture. It was as if she weren't a normal person, as if she were a mannequin. I kept driving, but something made me uneasy. Maybe the way she was standing, maybe the fact that she didn't move, or maybe that she didn't look at me. After a few seconds, I decided to brake. I can't leave her there at that hour, I thought. I turned around a few meters ahead and went back. But when I returned to the spot where I had seen her, she was no longer there. I stared, confused, looking for her. The road was completely empty. There were no trees nearby where she could hide. There were no houses, nothing. Just the falling rain. I thought maybe she had walked, so I moved slowly, and that was when I saw her again. Further ahead, again, on the side of the road, she was in the same position, motionless. That was when I got a bad feeling, because I was getting closer, but she was also moving away, without even moving. It was as if she were appearing, as if the wind were carrying her. I approached a little more slowly, but with my heart racing a bit. When I was close, I slowed down a bit, and that was when she turned her head abruptly toward me. That movement wasn't normal. It was fast, sharp, as if someone had put it in fast forward. At that moment, a bit of wind blew toward us. That wind lifted her hair a little, and that's when I saw her face. It had no expression. It had no emotions. It was like looking at a mannequin. An empty face, lifeless, without intention, without anything. That was a ghost. But I was already too close. I thought that what I was thinking was nonsense, that maybe it was a girl who needed help. I thought it even after what I had seen. Perhaps just to trick myself that ghosts didn't exist. I shouted to ask if she needed help. I know it sounds silly, but I did it. She didn't answer immediately. She just kept looking at me. And then, without saying anything, she started walking toward the car slowly, dragging her feet a bit, as if she were tired or didn't know how to walk well. Well, when she reached the door, she didn't ask for permission. She just opened it and got in. She got in. The seat sank. I felt that clearly. But the smell in the air had changed. It smelled like rot, like dampness, like wet earth. Like when you open a grave or turn over soil after an animal has died. I didn't say anything. I just opened the window. kept driving, and the atmosphere inside the car was heavy. The car turned cold, very cold, even though it was hot and humid outside. Inside the car, it was freezing. I tried to talk to her, asking where she was going, but she didn't answer me. At that moment, I was in doubt. A deeply rooted belief I held, knowing that ghosts do not exist, was being challenged. I was starting to have doubts, even though I also felt silly thinking this. And perhaps that woman just had mental problems. I started to move forward. She soon gave me an address. She told me very quietly, it wasn't clear. We kept moving forward. And then I started noticing something in the rearview mirror. Her reflection didn't look right. It was as if it were distorted. I didn't want to turn around directly, but I could feel her staring at me, unblinking. The air inside the car turned colder, the sound of the rain grew louder, and the silence inside the car became unbearable. After a few minutes, she spoke again. She said something I still remember. Further ahead, nothing more. I kept driving until she said, "Here." I looked ahead, but there was nothing, just a dark, empty road. I braked slowly, and just as I was about to turn to ask her, she had already disappeared. The seat was empty, the door closed. I didn't hear it open, I didn't feel anything get out. That woman simply vanished from my car. I sat frozen, staring at the seat in confusion, and then I looked up. She was on the road. I saw her in the mirror, standing in the middle of the road several meters back, completely motionless, like a mannequin, again, looking at the car. I didn't wait. I accelerated without looking back, without stopping. I drove until I got home, and that night I couldn't sleep, audience. However, that wasn't the worst of it. Days later, while talking to people in the area, someone mentioned something. A woman had been struck and killed on that road many years ago. They say she appears when it rains, and if you stop, she doesn't always let you go. According to road rumors, they say that woman makes you turn around. However, I was very lucky, and I also learned that ghosts do exist. Audience, what do you think of the episode so far? If you've made it this far, wasn't it a coincidence? Tell me in the comments what time you're listening to these stories and from where. Before we move on to the last story in the video, if you're enjoying it, leave a like. It helps me more than you imagine, especially now that I've been slow to upload content. I clarified that it was due to some technical issues, and from now on I will continue bringing you new horror episodes. But I won't interrupt you any longer. I'll leave you with this final story, and I'll see you soon in the next episode here on Estación Siniestra. Bye. This story I'm about to tell you was told to me by my family. It happened many years ago, in a small town in Guanajuato called La Sauceda. My name is Angela, and what I'm going to narrate happened to my great-grandfather back in the year 1980. At that time, the town was much smaller than it is now. There weren't many cars or motorcycles. People got around on donkeys or horses. As a matter of fact, my great-grandfather had a horse. But months before all this happened, the animal got sick and died. From then on, he would go to work in the fields by donkey. He had several hectares of crops. one right next to his house and others further away. He planted a bit of everything, but mostly it was corn. He was a countryman. He wasn't afraid of anything, or at least that's what everyone thought. But a year before all the paranormal things he experienced, something happened. In one part of his land, they found a man's body on the plot next to his house. They said he had been killed elsewhere, and they only went there to dump him. No one knew who he was or why he had been killed. His relatives just arrived, picked up the body, and took it away. But from that day on, something didn't feel the same. My great-grandfather started to notice strange things. It wasn't anything very obvious, but small, constant details. Sometimes, while working the land, he felt as if someone were watching him. However, there was no one there. But that feeling, that discomfort wouldn't go away. Other times, out of the corner of his eye, he could see as if someone walked behind him. He would turn around quickly, thinking it was my grandmother. But again, there was no one. Nothing. At first, he thought it was his imagination, that he was suggestible because of the dead man, you know. And over time, everything seemed to calm down. Months passed and nothing else happened until the date started to approach. The anniversary of that poor soul was drawing near. That was when the weirdness began. One day, my great-grandfather went to check the cornfield as always. He noticed something strange. Something had changed. Right in the spot where the body had been, the earth was not right. The corn in that area was spoiling. No matter how much he took care of it, it didn't grow the same. It looked weak, yellowish, as if something were killing it from underneath. As days went by, that part of the land became completely useless, dry, dead. And then worms appeared, but they weren't normal worms, they were white. The kind that come out when an animal is rotting. My great-grandfather thought maybe there was something buried. Some dead animal. A rat, a gopher. So one afternoon he grabbed the shovel and started to dig. He dug and dug, but he didn't find anything. The only thing was that the more he dug, the more the worms came out. It was as if they were coming from below. This unsettled him, but he still tried to convince himself it was natural, just some pest. 2 days passed after that man's death anniversary, and out of nowhere, the worms vanished. Little by little, the land began to come back to life. The cornfield grew once more. Everything seemed to have been a simple infestation, or so he thought. Months passed, and everything returned to normal. But again, as that same date approached, it happened again. The corn in that spot failed to grow once more. The ground dried up and the worms returned. But this time, that wasn't all. My great-grandfather started to feel watched again. But it wasn't a mild sensation anymore. It was constant, heavy, as if someone were standing there, watching him all the time. He would turn around, but there was no one. My great-grandmother also said she felt watched inside their house. The days passed, and that feeling only got worse. Until one evening, around 6 o'clock, just as night was falling, he heard something. He was working the land when suddenly he heard a whistle. It wasn't loud, but it was clear. And the strangest thing was that it didn't sound far off, it sounded close. Right at that spot, my great-grandfather looked up and started searching for where it came from, but There was no one in that field. There was nowhere to hide. The corn wasn't very tall yet. Everything was visible. My great-grandfather went back to work, brushing off what had happened. However, the whistle was heard again. The same tone, just as if someone were trying to get his attention. Still, there was no one there. After that evening, the whistling began to happen more often. Sometimes in the afternoon. Sometimes at night while they were having dinner, they would hear someone outside start to whistle. It could also be heard at dawn. My great-grandfather had to go out to water the crops at dawn so the water wouldn't evaporate. And it was during those hours that they heard it most. Always the same whistle, always close by, but there was never anyone there. The following year, everything got worse. Because it wasn't just whistling anymore. Now he would see something out of the corner of his eye. It was a shadow, like the shape of a man, but every time he turned around, no one was there. And all of this repeated for years, always on the same date, before and after the anniversary of that man's death. It was as if something would return, and then leave again. But there was one night when it all ended. My family says it was at dawn. My great-grandfather was asleep, when suddenly something woke him up. The sound of the whistling, but this one wasn't like the others. It was different, very, very long, too long. A whistle that seemed like it would never end. A normal person cannot do that. They run out of breath. That made him nervous. He got up and walked to the window, which faced the cornfield directly. Back then, the corn was low, so you could see everything. And there he saw it. Right where they had thrown that man, there was a figure standing. Tall, very tall, hunched over, thin. You couldn't see any details, but it was darker than the night itself. That thing wasn't moving. It was just there. And then the whistling began again. That thing was doing it. My great-grandfather stayed motionless, without making a sound, barely breathing out of fear. He started watching that thing. It stayed there for a few seconds, and then it began to move. That entity didn't walk, it floated through the air, very slowly. It only advanced a few meters and disappeared. After that night, everything changed. The worms never returned. The land recovered completely, and that place began to yield crops again, like before. My great-grandfather said that that night, whatever was there had finally left. But my grandmother said something more disturbing. She said that thing was death, that it had taken the soul of that man in pain.